Hi, I'm happy to welcome you to this talk today on Socially Engaged Buddhism in Cambodia on behalf of the Center for Khmer Studies in Siem Reap. Our speaker today is Mr. Napakadol Kittisenee. He has a BA in 2006 from Silpakorn University, where he studied and majored in Thai and Pali literature. His MA is in 2010 from Thammasat University in anthropology, and he wrote a thesis in Thai translated as Dhammayatra and Voluntary Displacement in Cambodia after the year zero. He has been working for the last several years in both Thailand and Cambodia for the Spirit and Education movement, a movement started by and still associated with the well-known public intellectual in Thailand, Ajahn Sulak Sivaraksha. His work for the last several years has brought him back and forth between Bangkok and the northwestern part of Cambodia. And he works in the projects that Spirit and Education movement are involved in here in Cambodia involve projects that promote and support the activities, projects and legacies of Dhammayatra in Cambodia. We're going to hear from him today about some of his work and more generally about the larger social movement of socially engaged Buddhism in Southeast Asia. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you and for the introduction, and everybody for participating in this lecture. I'm very honored to have the opportunity talking about socially engaged Buddhism in Cambodia. And I would say this is also the place where both my academic and spiritual life grew up in here. So we now, first of all, we will begin with talking about the concept of what is socially engaged Buddhism. Next slide, please. For those who study about Buddhism, would first be surprised by this term, engaged Buddhism. Because the core teaching of Buddhism, we're talking about non-self. We're talking about detachment to anything in worldly matters. But when I first learned about this term, engaged Buddhism, I keep asking myself, what's kind of this Buddhism works in terms of practices or its concept? And later on, I found out that if we want to make sense of this mode of Buddhism, we have to clarify it in two ways. The first way is dealing with the dogmatic understanding of this mode of Buddhism, or let's say in terms of the Buddhist teaching itself. Does it have any kind of sense of engagement in the teaching of Buddhism? And for the second category, I try to make sense the social concept of this mode of Buddhism. Next slide, please. For the teaching of Buddhism itself, as I found out or observed, I find the stories, or many stories, or stories after stories in Buddhism, talking about the three stages of learning. Or I will give you the important example of the Buddha's life, Buddha himself. First, he lived in his ordinary life as a prince, surrounded by property, by concubines, and by any other things. He cannot see the reality of changing condition of worldly matters, or the decaying of worldly matters. And after he went out of the palace and seeing the ill person, the dead, the ill person, the old people, and the dead person, and finally he found out the monkhood. That's the preferred status, or how to say, his touching figure in his feeling. So he keep asking himself, what's the core of life? What's the reality of life? How can he get out of this cycle of birth, getting old, illness and death? How can he get out of this cycle? So finally he decided to going out of the palace and be ordained. After 6 years of tormenting in his practice, he found out, he discovered the core teaching of Buddhism. So this is the period of disengagement in his lifetime. And finally, this is the point I would like to raise up here. Normally when we study Buddhism through reading the text written by social scientists or let's say the Westerners, we often see saying that Buddhism is the escapist. Most Buddhists are the escapists, or Buddhism is escaping religion, or something like that. But I would say the story of Buddha himself, he didn't renounce from the world totally. He renounced from the world. Just a period of time that he disengaged himself to be in silence and to be with himself. Then after he discovered the truth of life, or the core teaching of Buddhism, he come back to the society and began to propagate his discovery. Next, please. So we will begin with the symbol of the birthplace of the Buddha. And after he enlightened and finally passed away. This, in his lifetime, actually the longest period of his lifetime is the period of after his enlightenment. It's about 45 years of his Dharmic propagation in northeastern India. Next, please. This is also the picture depicting when he preached. This is when he preached the angels. Next, please. And this is also the impressive artwork that surprised me since I was young. The left picture showing a gesture of Buddha image provoking the story of his, from his lifetime when he tried to stop to cease the conflict among his relatives, conflicting over the shortage of water resource in the relatives' districts. And then after he stopped that conflict, he went out into the forest meditating because he got so much trouble with that conflict. After that, he went to the forest, and a monkey and elephant went to taking care of him. But when we talk about engaged Buddhism as a social concept, I would outline for three periods of time. When we talk about engaged Buddhism as a social concept, so we look into the social changes throughout the history, especially the history of mainland Southeast Asia, as I will outline these three stages parallel to social change. For the first one, engagement, I say in the bracket, pre-modern, because if we talk to the old people in like Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and maybe Myanmar as well, including myself, when I study my primary, secondary, and high school, my school was in the same compound of the temple. And from time to time, the monk from the temple also came to teach us in the classroom. So you see the engagement of religion, or how to say, it's a part of our life. It's not separate. It's not separated from our world. I mean the role of the religion. But and also in the past, especially in Thailand and Cambodia, also I think in Myanmar and Laos as well. In the past, all the male went into the temple for their formal study. But from the period of colonization afterwards, it happens in the second period of time. The state began to separate the religion from society, and in many schools, they were separated from the temple as they were before. So you can see it's not only the physical connection, but also the relation between the lay people and the monk or the religious members also began to be far away from each other. And what came with the modernization or this period? For example, in Thailand, in this period, that we got a lot of influence from the Western world, we try to initiate the secular school, and you can see after it's separate from each other, it cannot be part of each other. After that, it cannot be returned into the same compound as what happened before. And I will show you what happened after modernization in Cambodian case for the next slides. And also the aftermath of the modernization process. What happened with Buddhism or the religion in the societal level? From this slide, I will show you the series of pictures from engaged Buddhists, group of engaged Buddhists, or those who are working in socially engaged Buddhist field. This first picture taken from Laos, from the capital of Laos. When I brought a group of Khmer monks, nuns and lay people to meet with Venerable Sari Kantasilo, or the middle. He sits in the middle. Now he passed away. He did a lot of initiatives in terms of engaged Buddhism. For example, he tried to bring back the role of monks in the secular schools by inviting many monks going back to teach students at many state and private schools. Also, he initiated many projects promoting agriculture for the rural people, and Dharmic library or the library collecting or the community library. All of this are the initiatives of him in Laos. Next slide, please. And actually, the one who coined this term, engaged Buddhism, is the right picture when he was young, Venerable Thich Actually, this term came up when he tried to make sense what he was doing with other members during the Vietnam War, when there were polarized politics between the North and the South, and as a Buddhist and the leader, the spiritual leader, he tried to be neutral, but that's work or not from the eye of the state, I don't know. But he was, one of the star in the field of engaged Buddhism, because he was the first one who coined this term, engaged Buddhism. For his meaning, he means that for the monks, especially, as the society in this region respect monks so much, they value monks as the community leader and the society leader and so on. So he said monks should not remain at the temple solely, but they have to work outside the temple as well, because everywhere is a temple, if you realize. And for the left picture, when he was young as well, as I told you, modernization came up with many things, and one thing is colonialism and polarized politics in the Cold War. The left picture is Dalai Lama. He fled from Tibet area when the Communist Party in China claiming the land of Tibet, and he went into exile in India with his people. So this is also a big star in the field of engaged Buddhism. And I think in 1999 in Thailand, we have economic crisis. We call that crisis as Tom Yam Kung, the famous Thai food name, right? And the effect of this crisis also spread out throughout this region. So one spiritual leader in Thailand, or meditation master, Lom Tam Maha who is famous for meditation school, one of meditation school in Thailand. He led the project about raising gold to the National Bank of Thailand to save the country from the economic crisis. He came up with many criticisms about this project because some conservatives in Thailand saying that monks should not involved in this kind of thing. And for those who may be interested in ethics of care, would be fascinating in the project of left picture. This Venerable Alongkot, he initiated the project taking care of HIV patients. His project required much of funding from donation, mainly from donations, and many HIV-infected patients going there for treatment and live there until they pass away. He is very famous in this healthcare field, which is a part of Engaged Buddhism in Thailand. And here we come to Cambodia. This picture is the big star in Engaged Buddhism in Cambodia. His name is Venerable Mahakusananda. As some of you may have read his books step by step, we will talk about him later. Keep the slides, please. And this is the picture showing the connection or the network of those working on Engaged Buddhism. The left, the one on the left is Jamsulak Sivaraksa, and the middle one Mahakusananda, and the right one is Dalai Lama. Actually, there are four who are the patrons of the network called International Network of Engaged Buddhists, or INEB, which is a part of my previous organization's family. So when we brought this lens to look into Khmer society and try to read Khmer historical changes in framework of modernization, I found out that modernization process in Cambodia came up with colonialism, war series, and economic transformation, as I will show you the examples, as a response to these effects from the modernization. The first example, or the classic example, when there are demonstrations or the monks' protests in Cambodia, many people would refer this kind of activity to the history of monks' protests during French colonial period. In July of 1942, after the long period of suppression by the French colonial government, in many manifestations, like tax suppression to the people of Cambodia. So finally, the monks activists came out into the road around, I think, as I have read, 500, following by the thousands of laymen, marching towards the government officials during that time, which is under colonial rule, trying to protest against the arrest of some protest leaders. And finally, they have been cracked down, and some were arrested. And this event are remembered by many Khmer people during even nowadays. Next, please. And a few days ago, I found this news in Phnom Penh Post, the international newspaper of Cambodia. This is a monks' protest as well, happening in front of Jatamuk Theatre in Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia. I think hundreds of monks, following by the laymen, walking towards the Buddhist Institute. But this area is close to Ministry of Religion and Cult of Cambodia. They try to protest against, I'm not sure because this is the rumor that the government of Cambodia leased the casino, the piece of land which is nowadays the Buddhist Institute. I'll show you for the next slide. If somebody used to visit Phnom Penh, in a corner of Phnom Penh, which is very interesting in terms of symbolic geography, you see this is the statue of a well-respected Sankaracha, or the Patriarch, Supreme Patriarch, under the French rule. His name is Somdet Chuan Nam. This is newly erected at the roundabout in a corner not far from the river in Phnom Penh. And what's interesting here is the location of his statue. As he's sitting here, overlooking the largest casino on his right. And next to casino here is the Buddhist Institute. And now the rumor comes up that the government allowed this casino to extend their compound into the Buddhist Institute. And some would say that they sold out this piece of land to the largest casino in the country. That's why the monks' protest happening in the previous slide happened a few days ago, just a few days ago. And this is also an example of engaged Buddhism in Cambodia. The classic example of this is Tamayidra. Some of you may have learned in this course. Some of you may have learned a lot about violent stuff and conflict, the history of conflict, the history of violence, genocide, and other things, and other bad things in Cambodia, in the history of Cambodia. It's the history of wounds, it's the history of warfare, and so on. But we have to realize that Cambodia also provides international family, the peace-building efforts or peace-building initiatives. This activity or this event happening in 1992 at the refugee camp along Thailand-Cambodia border. You have to remind that during that time, 1992, the war is not finished yet. So there still be battlefields along the roads throughout the countries, and also the society was deeply torn by various political factions, like what happened at this moment in Thailand. At least we have four political factions during that time. And this group of monks and people at the refugee camp, they call themselves the fifth faction. They call themselves the Kittisenee, or the Army of Peace. The idea of them is bringing the refugee who were away from their homeland and living in the refugee camp for almost 20 years. You have to keep in mind that after 1979, many Cambodian people flee to the border, right? Following with various factions. And at that moment, the resistant group along the border fighting with the central government within the country. So you can imagine the mentality of the people of this in this country. It's deeply torn and deeply fractured. So the idea of this march is bringing people to meet each other and to reconcile the conflict among several fractions. First, they walked into their homeland with the number of around 400. They walked towards Phnom Penh from Thai-Cambodian border to Phnom Penh, back and forth, and from Phnom Penh back to the border. For the first leg, it includes around 400 people, but on the way back, it left only not more than 100, not more than 100, because most of the participants accidentally met their relative in the country, so they set up their living there, not returning to the border again. So this is not solely symbolic, but it's real in their feeling. And what's surprising for the people is when this march reached into Phnom Penh, thousands of people came out to greet this march. Because you can imagine, during that time, when the fighting among the factions happening along the way, people dare not to get out of their home. Or different districts. Some expat here would say in 1990s, if they want to travel from this province to another province, they have to get internal visa to get into another province. So it's not easy to travel for a long distance like this. So this march has this kind of authority or symbolic authority by the gesture of walking, led by monks, followed by a layman. So after they reached Phnom Penh, people grow up into thousands. And when you have to imagine that during the Khmer Rouge period, and after that, people have less contact with religion because many elements of religion have been destroyed during the war, like a temple, Buddha statues were damaged, were severely damaged. Some monks were forced to be married, or some were killed. So their minds were shaken by this kind of happenings in regarding their religion. So when these monks preaching in traditional voice, walking in traditional gestures, summoning people along the road, and finally giving water blessing, which is the symbolic gesture in Cambodian society that when you have suffering, you go to the temple asking for the water blessing. It will cleanse your suffering away. So when people, thousands of people in Phnom Penh during that time, seeing this march, reaching their homeland, and they went off of home receiving this water blessing. It's a touching image, and many people cry because they have less contact, or someone who no contact with Buddhism for like decades. So this is a very powerful event after the war. And the Venerable Mahaposananda in the right picture is the leader of this event. Next slide, please. And after 1992, the peace march continues every year in different districts, trying to promote reconciliation among other factions. And sadly, in 1994, when we walked from Battambang towards Mainland province, the stronghold of Khmer Rouge, from shortly after departing from Battambang, somewhere around the reservoir, the largest reservoir, or the largest dam that Khmer Rouge had some project, irrigation project there. One monk and nun died in that ceasefire, in that fire exchange between the government military and the Khmer Rouge military by using the row of marchers as the bunker along that road. So this is not just a symbolic activity, but it costs life as well, So in 1995, the next year after, Mahaposananda insisted to walk into that area, Mainland province again. And now Ieng Sari, or the top leaders of Khmer Rouge on the left,